Welcome everybody to the Everton Byline. This is episode number 68. We are in the international break, and that means we'll be answering a lot of your questions later on in the show. Got a few other talking points to get through as well. I'm Matt Jones. Joining me as ever is Paddy Boylan. Paddy, how are you? You having a good international break?
Yeah, actually, for once, really enjoying the international break. So not only have we got 2 weeks to think about some positive Everton results or positive Everton results singular, but also the international football has, for once, I think, lived up to its billing. I mean, that Ireland game on Sunday, really quite special, I think, in how dramatic it was, the turn of events, and then what happened right at the end. So it was good fun, and it's very rare that I say that during an international break.
Yeah, I've actually watched a bit of football over the weekend. Like I watched that game, and I watched Everton women. The bit less
Yes,
said about that, the better, to be
yeah,
honest. We're going to have Sue Smith on to talk about that later in the week on the Blue Room. And Alan's coming on as well to talk about Ireland. So we've got both of those bases covered. But yeah, actually tuned in and watched a bit of the games. Like I'm going to watch Scotland. I think obviously that'll be tonight by the time this goes up with people. I think they've got to play Denmark, haven't they, and get us up there. So yeah, a bit more interesting, isn't it? It's at the end of the
yeah,
qualifiers and there's a bit more riding on stuff. But yeah, we will, of course, talk about Everton's connections to that Ireland win. And a lot of people saying we should sign Troy Parrott as well. So we'll delve down that avenue too. But just a reminder, as ever, we are sponsored by the Bridewell. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see their logo there in the bottom left-hand corner. If you are watching us on YouTube, do leave us a comment, do hit like, do hit subscribe, and you'll get notified whenever we get we put a show up. If you're listening on Apple or on iTunes, you can leave us a rating or a review there. And if you would like to, you can get in touch with us, evertonbyline@gmail.com. And just somebody who did get in touch with us, Paddy, over the last few days, want to give him a shout out to Paul Collin. I think I'm pronouncing that right, Paul. He's from the Portland Evertonians US&A Supporters Club. Paul sent us a really kind email saying the big listeners to the show. We said we'll give him a shout out. They are relaunching the club, so anybody in that area who's an Evertonian who wants to get down, do get in touch with them. Things firing up again there. So yeah, and Paul did promise Paddy that he buys a round in the Denby for giving him a shout out on here as well. So
we'll hold him to that. Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, if you're in that area of the world, then we've got listeners, a lot of listeners from overseas, a lot of people who still from Australia still want to go for a drink of Paddy as well, which I'm interested in. But yeah, do give them a shout out. But yeah, cheers for the email, lads, and great to see the good work the sports club doing is going to be continuing. So yeah, if you want to get in touch with us about anything else, it's evertonbyline@gmail.com. And yeah, let's get stuck into it, Paddy, because even though the international break has been relatively quiet from an Everton point of view, you had an interview out today, or sorry, on Monday, with Tiano Barry. Really good stuff as always. You know, really enjoyed it. Good to get a sort of sense of his personality and obviously what he's made of his Everton career. Really good little nugget in there about him playing on with a dislocated shoulder against Fulham. Was that when he did that mad bit of skill and fell over?
yes, but I mean, so he was doing the interview in French.
Yeah.
The club had a translator there to help, an interpreter there to help. I also speak French. So me and the interpreter were both trying to get to the bottom of when exactly the shoulder popped out. He told us that it happened before he hit the ground, which I was surprised by because I thought he had actually in the stadium. I thought he dislocated his shoulder when he fell to the ground, and then he got up and he was walking gingerly. He said it happened slightly earlier in that particular move, and yeah, quite remarkable. He played on, I think, for about 10-15 minutes. He wanted to soldier on. He felt he needed to try and take his opportunity starting a game again so soon after the disappointment of Sunderland. Didn't want to let that opportunity to go to waste. But then Everton's medical team intervened and said, we need to put this back into place and then you can carry on. So I think that was the happy kind of middle ground. Shoulder back into place, carry on. And it was probably his best performance in an Everton shirt yet, you would say.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we get on to talking about like the actual what he said, like, just on that, like interview somebody with a translator, do you have to do that much difference? Like, would your prep be different to say go into interview Michael Keane or any of the other players who could potentially speak English? Because I imagine a part of a chat like that, I think he obviously did manage to convey his personality and aspects of his upbringing, which are really fascinating, that sort of cut to the heart of him. But that must be quite tough when you are going through an interpreter. I imagine it's probably the first time you've spoken to Barry, isn't it, as well?
Yeah.
In that capacity, like that must be a little bit strange, I imagine, when the point of the piece is trying to hit on those sort of emotional sort of themes that you really need to dig quite deep down into.
Yeah, so not too much actually changed. I felt like I had a decent. I was going to these interviews having prepped and having kind of jotted down discussion points. I don't think you can just stick rigidly to those discussion points. I think that kind of the art of the interview is that sometimes you have to latch on to what the other person's saying and then bring that in and make it a bit more conversational. But I'm kind of used to doing it before. We did, I think as I've mentioned on this podcast before, we did Carlos Alcaraz. It was a big group of us actually there, journalists, who did that before the first test event. So you're going back to the start of this year. We actually did that in the Titanic, and that was a really weird setup. We were all stood up, and he was kind of stood in the middle of us all, which must have been quite daunting for him with the interpreter. So we'd ask a question, the interpreter would translate it for Alcaraz. Alcaraz would speak in Spanish, and then the interpreter would speak back to us. When you're doing it, you're never quite sure kind of how much you should be focusing on him or speaking to the interpreter or whatever else. This was a little bit easier for me because I know more French than I do Spanish. And like I say, I felt there was kind of a pretty clear narrative here, clear story to tell. And to be fair to him, the benefit of this was he did it in his own language. He's obviously much more candid, obviously more eloquent in his own language, and I think that's when you're most likely to get people to open up. So it was better, much better that way than in. He does speak English, but in broken English. I mean, I was actually waiting for him downstairs in the foyer at Finch Farm for him to come down and do the interview, tell us he was ready, and he was with Alcaraz as he came down the stairs. And one of the things I wanted to touch on a little bit was that theme we discussed the other week about maybe isolation and where he is in the squad. Like, who does he interact with? What are those interactions like? And that kind of little bit of behind the scenes, which didn't even make the piece in the end, was just him speaking to Alcaraz in Spanish as it happened. I think we all think, oh, well, here's a French speaker who's come over and he must just have latched on to Idrissa Gueye and probably Iliman Ndiaye. But from what I saw, he was pally with Alcaraz and speaking away in fluent Spanish after his year at Villarreal. So he's a bright lad. Speaks a lot of different languages. I thought he was really honest and open. I mean, he spoke at times about feeling depressed earlier in his career when he was having slumps. And I suppose one of the big takeaways was kind of he's been here before. Tiano Barry. He basically had, for the last 4 or 5 years, he's moved club every season. And within those moves, there have been periods of adaptation. He went from Belgium to Switzerland, and then from Switzerland to Spain, and now from Spain to the UK. But one of the things he was saying to me was that he feels as though this is a tougher transition to manage, La Liga to the Premier League, just because of the speed. He was talking about how in Spain, it's like he called it football from school. And he didn't mean like really unstructured. He was actually saying the opposite. It was like a professor was drilling into you exactly where you needed to be in Spain. Very choreographed, coordinated, as though you're learning constantly. These kind of tactical blueprints and whatever else. Staying in England, it's a lot more chaotic, and you might be playing centre forward, but the person who's meant to be marking you strides forward 30, 40 yards with the ball. Wonder if he's maybe talking about facing Mickey van der Ven or something for Tottenham there. So I think sometimes a lad that young with so many moves needs to stop and pause and think. And this is probably one of the first times he's had to do that, given what he was up to over the summer. He had his first kid over the summer. He had a young daughter. Didn't see her for a month because he was away with France at the under-21 Euros. Then signed for Everton, of course. So I think it was a bit of a whirlwind for him. So maybe a nice opportunity for him to stop to think, to pause about where he's come from, where he's been. But then also probably the ideal time for us in the media and for the fan base to hear a bit more about him after the more positive showing against Fulham.
Yeah. Did he seem like relatively relaxed? Because I imagine, like, again, he's done stuff obviously with Everton's in-house media, hasn't it? But I feel like this is probably the first like external thing he's done. Like, certainly it'd be the first like long form thing he's done. And I listen, I imagine there will be. He would have had a reputation about like the British press in inverted commas and like the media over here, and and what they're like, and as much as like you're relatively comfortable in French and in that environment, it's like for him, I imagine, I suppose if I was doing an interview and it was going through a translator, I'd be sitting there thinking, are they getting this right? Am I going to come across well? Like that sort of thing, especially if like a young lad, like he was quite new to that environment. So I imagine that must have been. You're not a daunting person, Paddy, by any means, but the situation might have been a little bit daunting for him, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, understandably, if that had been the case, you would have completely got it. It didn't come across that way, really. I always think people open up a little bit more once they get into their rhythm. They open up a little bit more anyway. You need to have the trust you need to trust the person who's interpreting for you, and you need to trust the interviewer, I think. And I think kind of
sorry, Pat, just on the translator, do Everton have their own translator, or will he sort of bring somebody in, or will the player sort that? Like, who goes about organising that?
Yeah, so the club sorted that. We had a conversation before the interview, and the club sorted that. They said they wanted an interpreter in, more than anything, to kind of tell them what was being said as well. They use a guy called Phil Dickinson. It's the same translator and same interpreter we used for the Alcaraz interview I mentioned earlier on the pod, and he's very he's very well known in sports media. He does a lot, not only at Everton but a variety of different clubs. So he's just a freelancer, and they use his services whenever they need. And like I say, getting them to speak in their own language, I think, is the most important thing, because while maybe it's a little bit tougher for us as journalists, ultimately you're going to get better answers out of it than if they were speaking in English. I mean, I've had a few of these. Like, I've set up an interview with Alan a few years ago, but I have to be honest, my Portuguese is not fantastic, so that didn't happen. I've always wanted to interview Yerry Mina, but that's a tougher one because he speaks Spanish. And in a lot of those situations, I've had to kind of ask around. So I've asked people who've worked with them, and I've said, well, I'm thinking of doing this, thinking of speaking to Alan. What is English like? And I think with Alan, the response I got back from a couple of contacts was, he will speak English, but you won't be able to get beyond kind of surface level stuff if you do it in English rather than his native language. So that's the benefit. You're trying to make these guys feel as settled and relaxed as possible. It's the same with anything. Same with you as a host, I guess. You're trying to make the people feel as settled and relaxed as possible, so they give the best version of themselves. And to be fair to him, he definitely warmed to it. He was pretty laid back, and I thought spoke with an honesty that said a lot about him. He clearly kind of thinks about stuff and reflects on it, and then tries to use that to kind of fuel them.
No, really good stuff. Don't want to like talk too much like about what's in it itself, because I don't want to give it away. Obviously, we'll put the link in the description to the pod, but just the stuff around it, and like the setting up and trying to make these young lads feel comfortable, I think is really interesting. But yeah, if you want to read that, I've not read it already, I will put the link to the piece in the description for this podcast. So yeah, moving on, Paddy, to point number 2, and then we'll get stuck into some of our questions from our listeners and viewers. Seems to have been over the last couple of weeks, certainly, a lot more talk about Iliman Ndiaye and his future. There's been some links around James Garner as well, hasn't there? And Newcastle, and I think Aston Villa have been mentioned with him as well. But I think Ndiaye is sort of the one that Evertonians notice and potentially fear more than anything. Obviously, I think he went a little bit viral again, didn't he, over the week with that bit of Skilligan on BBC News and leaving that a poor lad who was trying to make it as a pro tied up in knots. But it feels like he's starting to get to that level where he's starting to be mentioned with, big name clubs in Europe, in this country as well. Obviously, I think there was some interest from Inter Milan, wasn't it, in the summer, and Everton effectively told him to get gone because it was so late and the valuations were so far apart. But I don't know about you, it feels like we're starting to creep into that territory of him now, doesn't it?
Yeah, it definitely feels like a new phase. And I think that started over summer. But if anything, has escalated a little bit so far this season. I think we've spoken before on past podcasts about Ndiaye maybe showing a bit more of himself in that right wing role. He's had to effectively adapt to a new position, but it's given him an opportunity to show his creativity, to become more creative, to score different kinds of goals as well at times. And I just think he's putting, like last season, he had a good first season at Everton, but there were times when it kind of, for me, ebbed and flowed, where he'd have an outstanding game or he'd have an outstanding moment, but then would disappear for a little bit of time. Like I say, a good season, but not an outstanding one. I think right now, probably for me, he's been Everton's best player so far this season. I really noticed the change after the first half against Manchester City. That's when it seemed as though this went from Everton fans think Iliman Ndiaye is really good to other fans and fans of a top Premier League club right now in Manchester City have cottoned on to how good this lad is as well. So I think that takes us into different territory. Since then, I think he had some really good moments in the first half against Spurs. You've got the goal against Sunderland as well, which is obviously the only televised game on a Monday night in the UK. Therefore, more eyes watching that, I would argue, on Monday Night Football. So I think it's inevitable, actually, that we start to, given how good he's been for club and given how important he is now for country, I think it's inevitable that we are starting to see more rumours around him. Whether they're all true or not, of course, is a different matter. The one I reported over the summer was at Inter Milan. I don't think that was ever likely to happen. At that time, Everton were pretty insistent that he's a key player and they want to build around him. But it keeps on rumbling on. You see a new link every day, and I think recently you've started to see more Premier League teams mentioned as well. The situation's quite straightforward, I think, for now. He's contracted until 2029. So what's that, 3.5 years, if my normally very poor maths is correct on this occasion. It's an awfully long time left on his deal. I think where this gets interesting, and I'll draw a parallel with Jared Branthwaite here, is if a club comes in at a certain level and Ndiaye kind of thinks to himself, I wouldn't mind that as a transition, but Everton say no. And of course, they'd be well within the right to say no. I hope they say no, because he's a great player to watch. He's a great player to cover. But then the Branthwaite argument effectively was, well, if you're turning down bids of, I think it was 50-ish million pounds from Manchester United for me, then why am I, as he was at the time, Branthwaite, kind of a mid to low earner in this squad? That doesn't make any sense. If you're kind of valuing me as one of the best centre-backs in the country, you might get into that territory with Ndiaye. So while theoretically he's got 3.5 years on his deal, you may end up getting into a situation where enough clubs come calling that he and his agent are effectively able to say, well, we'll stay, but show us. And that this is me kind of hypothesizing here rather than saying that is definitely going to happen. But that tends to be how it works. And that's why I used the example of Branthwaite, because that is basically what happened with his new deal over summer.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting how this sort of ultimately goes. Like just from like a purely like day to day, how you feel about this like kind of perspective. Like I think one of the reasons why like the fears built maybe quite quickly about him. I'm not scared about him going in January by any means, but I think because he's such a social media clip-upable footballer, you get like fans from everywhere going, look at this bit of skill. Why aren't we going for him? And I think like your algorithm is obviously Everton related and Ndiaye related, and then that gets amplified onto that horrific For You tab whenever you log on.
You're
thinking, oh no, everyone's looking at him now. And like I think just because he's like so skillful and got so many like viral moments that like everyone sort of wants a bit of a piece of him and thinks he could be easy pickings when it comes to Everton. But like I think you're right. I think that the Branthwaite example I think is going to be interesting in regards to whether. And listen, every situation is different with every player, but is that going to be how Everton choose to operate going forward under this new model where you've got your best player potentially at their peak in terms of valuation and you tie them down. You do what you can to tie them down to keep them here instead of saying, right, we're going to cash out now while the valuation is here and we're going to use that money to improve position X, Y, and Z going forward. Like, I think, with Ndiaye, like, what would Everton be looking at for him? You probably talk about similar numbers to what they'd value Branthwaite at, maybe last summer and the summer before. You would say maybe a bit less because of the English situation with Branthwaite and all that. But I think it's interesting that like how if you with Ndiaye and potentially the other players they sign who go on to be really good, like is the model going to be your stay and we're going to do what we can to keep you, going to pay you what you deserve and fill in the gaps around you. Also to use those players to kind of improve the squad elsewhere. I don't think we're anywhere near the situation yet where he's going to be moving. Certainly not in January. But it does sort of feel as though over the last few weeks with performances. And listen as well. Like if he goes and has a great AFCON and helps Senegal win it, like that's a competition which feels like it's increasingly more high profile, gets a lot more coverage and airtime around the world. Now I think that would potentially push him forward into a bit of a shop window as well. But I'm not concerned yet. But like I could do without every fan, every other club putting a tweet up of him doing some amazing skill on social media, going, let's get this lad here.
Well, it's funny that that's your For You feed because mine over the last 24 hours or so has been various videos, normally fan shop videos of Seamus Coleman charging around that pitch in Hungary after the
it's Ndiaye and Irish fans celebrating in an airport. That's what it's
I've seen various versions of Irish fans celebrating location X. And to be fair, I don't mind that, by the way. I'd probably rather see that than Newcastle or Tottenham fan tells us how much they want to sign Everton's best, as he is right now, Everton's best attacking player. So, yeah, maybe the For You tab for once, and I stress for once there, is actually working in my favour here.
Oh, yeah. Scary, but not terrified yet in that regard. I think it'll all be absolutely sound. So yeah, just before we get into taking our questions from listeners, just a reminder, we have got a partnership at the moment with NordVPN. NordVPN helps you stay safe and secure while accessing streaming services and content, no matter where you are in the world. If you're traveling and need to catch a match, NordVPN has got you covered. As we've spoken before, we both use it ourselves. Paddy's going to be using it while he's traipsing around Australia later this year. And it's been a game changer for staying protected online, especially when working away. It even lets you switch your virtual location to access sports and TV shows from other countries so you can keep up with the Toffees from anywhere in the world. Using NordVPN means you're also safeguarding yourself from cyber threats and dodgy public Wi-Fi networks, so you can stream and browse with total peace of mind. It's really easy to use. You just switch your virtual location to access apps and websites from different countries, plus one NordVPN account that covers up to 10 devices, so you can protect the whole family with just one plan. All this just for the cost of a cup of coffee a month, so make sure you don't miss out on the exclusive deal. Head to nordvpn.com/blueroom and get an extra 4 months free when you sign up for the 2-year plan. And don't worry, there's no risk with NordVPN's 30-day money-back guarantee. So head over to nordvpn.com/blueroom. That's nordvpn.com/blueroom to find out more. Paddy, we did ask for questions from our listeners and viewers, as we always do during the international break. We'll take a few from Blue Sky first. We've had 2 along the similar theme. County Road Bobblers basically tweeted a picture from Father Ted saying, he's great, isn't he, Ted? Troy Parrott. Liam D79 said, Troy Parrott, Everton, discuss. He is very much flavour of the month, isn't he, Paddy, at the moment? Obviously, a hat-trick against Hungary, 2 goals against Portugal. Everton potentially need a striker. Are you getting on this bandwagon or not?
I don't know. It's the honest answer. They have been linked with him, obviously, over the last week or so. I've heard nothing myself yet to corroborate those links, and haven't reported anything along those lines yet. I think it is safe to assume that they will be looking at striking options both in January and I think over summer, which is going to be a better market for them in the main. There's a bit of chatter around Parrott potentially being an Everton fan, isn't there? I know when I saw on social media that one of the Irish Everton supporters groups had said that he's got family members in the supporters group, and said he's a big blue himself. I can find no trace of anything when I did a sweep earlier. I can find no trace of him being an Everton fan or.
I think that's just Coleman being in his ear constantly.
Having connections. Well, it seems to be a family connection through people who are they're supporting. I mean, obviously, Coleman effectively, when O'Brien signed, Coleman, they both said, didn't they? They both revealed that Coleman had been saying to him, "Get yourself over," kind of thing. So it is something you could imagine Seamus doing. He's an ambassador for Everton, even when he goes over and plays with Ireland abroad and kind of in Europe. I'm always a little bit wary, as well as Parrott has done, of performances on the international stage skewing a general sense of this player and their value and their worth, whether they are the right signing or not. I think ultimately you scout across a whole season, and this is one game, 2 games if you include his excellent performance against Portugal too, and you'd actually be, as good as those performances were, it's a bit like signing players from the World Cup. You're looking for a broader range. What does go in his favour is that when Ireland have needed him in the really big moments, he stepped up. And I love the different kind of finishes in there as well. So anybody that's not seen them, please go and have a look at those 2 Ireland wins against Portugal and Hungary. But there's an opportunistic header from a set piece from a corner against Portugal. Everyone will have seen now the last minute goal against Hungary, I think, where it's again just him, sheer force of will, getting there in the box before, I'd argue, he's third favourite for that ball when it's headed back, but he somehow just gets there. Good movement, good finish. And then the other 2 goals, nerves of steel with the penalty. And I really like the second one against Hungary, where he's played in by a great ball, from a great ball over the top by Finn Azars. And as the keeper's coming out, he just kind of dinks it over. So, I mean, wide range of finishes there. I think Everton could do with a finisher, because while I do think Tiano Barry has shown promise, and Beto obviously has played his role over the last 12 months, a lot of chances are going begging right now. So if Troy Parrott can do that all the time, then great. But he is in Holland right now with AZ, and I think typically the transition from there to the Premier League is not always the easiest. And the Everton example in a slightly different position was Davy Klaassen. For some reason, the first name that came to my head, Matt, when I was thinking about Eredivisie strikers who came to the Premier League was, do you remember Afonso Alves, who was scoring regularly in Holland, came over to Middlesbrough and did not do anything at all. For what it's worth, I think Parrott would have a better chance of sort of readapting, if we want to call it that, because of his time in the Tottenham Academy and being from Ireland. But I think there are some questions there. That's not to say I wouldn't want him, but I've not heard beyond the rumours everybody has seen on social media, I've not heard anything yet to suggest he's the one they necessarily want to go for. I have reported, and I think we mentioned this on last week's show, I've reported of ongoing interest in Ivan Toney, but I think that's a tough one to pull off as well for a number of reasons. So it's going to be really interesting to see where Everton go with this. It's quite a delicate balancing act in the sense that they are just trying to, little by little, get Tiano Barry up to speed and where they want him. But there is clearly a need for more goals. So it's just trying to find the right balance there. And then you've got Beto. But going back to the earlier point about selling, I think you've got to know when to sell at the right time. And I'm not talking about Ndiaye there, because I hope Ndiaye stays at Everton for a very long time. Somebody like Beto, you're probably now at a point where the longer from now you go on without selling him, the more his value diminishes. Like, his peak value is probably, from an Everton perspective, over the summer. And there's probably some value in there in January, and there's probably some value there in the summer again. But he gets a little bit older. He's not scoring as regularly. If he loses his place permanently to Barry or a new striker, then I think that affects his value again. So I think Everton have got to find a way of, in this PSR era, as it is until Friday's vote at the Premier League meeting, I think they have to find ways of eking out what they can, getting what they can from these sales. And I think somebody like Beto, to me, is the kind that you probably have to try and sell at the right time.
Yeah, to be honest, I've not seen much of him at all before this week, Barrett. So his goal record looks good. 14 games, 13 goals this year, 20 goals in 47 appearances last year. He was on loan at Excelsior the season before that. He got 17 and 32. So looks like he's finding it very easy to score goals in the Eredivisie. But as you said, it is such a massive step up. But
AZ will be delighted, won't they? Because he's gone from somebody who's performing really well for them in the Eredivisie to somebody now that, let's be honest, everybody's talking about. Certainly in the UK and Ireland and Hungary. Everybody's going to be talking about him off the back of those performances and the teams he's done it against, because these are two decent sides. In Portugal's case, a very decent side. And like I say, all the finishes kind of showed something a little bit different. They must have been sat there watching that and thinking, we're going to get a decent fee now out of this. We can chuck another 10 million or whatever on the potential asking price. And I guess that's my other question with this. It's whether actually it's worth that when you factor in what he's likely to produce over the course of a whole season.
Definitely. Sticking with the Ireland theme, I've got a couple of questions here I'm going to group together. So first one is from our friend Laura Gates, who said, what do we think happens with Jake O'Brien, with Garner being right back? Better suited there, really. Keane hard to drop on current form. I'd drop Tarkowski, but he's too much of a, quote, favourite and has been solid for us. What's the best solution? The Toffees Chainsaw Massacre, great name. Said, with right back being the biggest issue in the squad, brackets, in my opinion, why do you think Moyes hasn't used Coleman, bearing in mind he's played almost 90 minutes in the 4 internationals this season? Do you think we will look to strengthen this position in the January window? So there's 2 parts there. Let's take the second part first with Coleman. Obviously, there's been a massive sort of clamour for him to get back in the Everton team in the aftermath of these Ireland games. I think the social media clips that you mentioned before have sort of reminded everybody how beloved he is by Irish football supporters and Everton supporters. And he's obviously done really well when he's been called upon in these games. I think when we spoke about Coleman before, I've often sort of said I sort of see this part of his career very similar to how Jagielka ended his career at Everton, where it was one of those where you could play him for a game out of nowhere and he would be absolutely fine. And you could just drop him in and then maybe take him out for a few weeks. And then if you need him again in an emergency, you can drop him in there. And I'm still sort of in that mindset. It wouldn't surprise me over the next few weeks if Everton have got a lot of games coming up, obviously, over Christmas. He just came in for a game here and there. But as a solution in the medium term at right back, I'd love it if he had this great sort of Indian summer in his career and finished the season great and played 15, 20 games. But I just in terms of like the evidence and taking the romanticism out of it, I just worry if his body and his condition at the moment could handle like Premier League football. And let's be honest as well. And like I think Ireland obviously have done great the last few weeks, but I think they play a very, very defensive style, spring on the counter attack, and Coleman plays a sort of like a right back in a back five, so he's got a lot of cover, a lot of support. There's not loads of onus on to go forward.
Yeah,
I think at Everton there will be a bit more of an ask of him to be an attacking presence, and I think playing in the back four as well, you maybe don't get quite that same level of cover. So I suppose I'm saying on Coleman, Paddy, like I would love it, and it wouldn't surprise me at all because he's proven people wrong his entire career. But I think for me, like the last week doesn't change loads really, but I would be absolutely fine with him playing 3 or 4 games between now and the end of the season, and I don't think he'd let anybody down.
I don't think we've learned an awful lot about Seamus Coleman over the last couple of weeks. Yes, he's done a very good job in specific circumstances for Ireland. I think he deserves immense credit for that. Yes, he can still do a job, probably for club or country when needed. But I think I'm actually preparing a piece on Coleman right now for The Athletic, and we've kind of got into similar territory here, Matt, in the sense that I think it's about repetition. I think it's about he's played 4 games now this season, and they've all been for Ireland. I'm taking the League Cup out of it for Everton. And what Moyes will want to see is he won't want to chop and change his backline all the time. He will want somebody to be in there every single week. Now, if you go back to the summer, I think there was a real consideration, not only from Everton, but probably from Coleman himself, as to whether this would continue. And I'd argue, actually, the contract was there for Coleman if he was happy to commit. I remember similar discussions being had before the start of the previous season. We were out in Ireland on the pre-season camp when they were in it was County Kildare, actually, close to Dublin, and we had a sit down, 3 of us, 3 journalists, with Coleman, and he was talking about how he was kind of convinced by his performances at the back end of that season that he should persevere, even though he's picking up more injuries, even though he knew he was starting to wind down. So I think that's been a consideration for him these last few seasons. I think he's renewed over the summer as much, if not more so, for his leadership and what he brings to the squad. This idea that he's in there in the dressing room week in, week out, he's on the training pitch with them, driving those standards. So I think the questions are still the same, and I think we've still got, if we flip it, a lot of the same answers with regards to could he do a job in a one-off game? Yes. The level is still good enough. He still does it. I think you're right to touch on the difference in positioning. Everton ideally want, if you look at what Moyes has done recently, Everton ideally want somebody to be able to play on the front foot and to be able to create. So I think that's why he's gone with O'Brien first as defensive option and then Coleman. I kind of feel as though Coleman obviously can't be Everton's long-term right back. He's 37. Jake O'Brien, for me, isn't a right back. He's a makeshift right back and has done a pretty good job there, all things considered. And I'm not entirely sure anybody else on the books is going to either want to do it long-term or is capable of doing so. So I think Everton will look at right backs.
Yeah, and just like on the O'Brien... Sorry.
And Summer. Jake O'Brien's a really interesting one because I actually think the original plan for him was to come in for a year, be the third choice centre-back behind Branthwaite and Tarkowski, bed in. And then I think there was a school of thought that Branthwaite would probably go that following window. You have to remember that at that time, the ownership situation hadn't been resolved. So I think they thought that we've kept him for this summer, but it's very hard to do it again next. We'll get big money. We've kind of got our replacement 12 months early. Let him bed in for this year and then he can take over. Obviously, a couple of things. There were a couple of spanners thrown in the works there, weren't there, in the sense that, first of all, Branthwaite stayed. But I think the other one as well is that at various points, Michael Keane has done really well, and O'Brien has made for a rod for his own back in being so competent in the main at right back. I think Moyes sees him as a centre back. I think O'Brien definitely sees himself as a centre back and is obviously playing there for Ireland now on the right of a back three as it normally is, providing a bit of cover for Coleman. But it's going to be interesting to see how this develops, because right now, whether we agree with it or not, you would suggest he's probably fourth choice centre back in the setup. I think the argument when Branthwaite is finally fit is whether Keane or Tarkowski comes out. Now, I think Keane's been Everton's best central defender so far this season, but they do like that Tarkowski Branthwaite partnership and have given Tarkowski a new deal. So it's not an obvious quick route into the side for O'Brien. I think what he's got to hope is that he gets back to playing games at centre back regularly and eventually can oust Keane and then take advantage of Tarkowski's kind of aging and get in there. It'd be really cool at some point to see a Branthwaite O'Brien partnership. Feels really quite modern. Feels like you could play much higher line. Two big imposing lads, but also quick as well. And I think that ultimately should be the goal for Everton medium term. It's just a little bit unclear now for me as to how they get there straight away.
Like, I also don't think we've seen the last of him at right back, like, by any means. Like,
I wouldn't be hugely surprised if he started at Man United at right back, to be honest.
Not at all. I think I'd probably be surprised if he didn't, to be honest. Like, I still feel like that. I don't know, Moyes maybe sees Garner playing there, and like games at home, we're going to have more of the ball. We're expected to win. There's a bit more attacking impetus. Like, it would not shock me in the slightest if he was back there against United, just to potentially be a bit more secure defensively, give you a bit more threat from set pieces. Like that is totally feasible from my point of view. So I still think he'll get loads of minutes over Christmas. Maybe not necessarily in his best position, but like these things change quickly. They're like, you know, a player could get injured. Like Tarkowski could get sent off, Keane could get sent off. One of them could get injured. You know,
Branthwaite situation. We've seen that, haven't we?
Yeah. All of a sudden, he's back in the team. So I suppose while he might have to be a little bit patient in the short term, might be more of a rotation option. Like he will get a chance at some point, and it's ultimately up to him whether he takes it or not. Let's rattle through a few more. We've got this one from Andrew Lindsay. He said, any updates from Paddy on the new structure under Nick Cox and how he's been in place? There's still a number of roles in the academy that need to be filled.
Yep. So Nick Cox has been in position now for just over a month, officially, after completing his onboarding process, and I think that took a bit of time as well. So he has been in the building for a while. I think he's still getting his foot in the door. When you come in initially, there's a lot that you need to kind of look at and assess and analyze. And I think the first thing he's going to have to do and will be doing is kind of looking at what changes need to be made and where. I mean, we've spoken on previous podcasts that he's got a lot of different departments in his remit. There's not a recruitment function here that's handled by other people, but it's off the top of my head, and hopefully I don't miss any, but you've got women's team, academy, coaching, medical, which also then you include sports science and conditioning, data and analysis. So there's 5 or 6 there before you even start. There's going to have to be a lot of meetings and a lot of kind of getting to grips with what actually this is and what his scope is and what he's going to do. I think the academy is going to be a big focus and a big preoccupation. We saw that early doors with the Freakins, and they released, was it 5 bullet points at the time of the takeover in December, and I think the academy was 2 or 3, if I recall correctly. And it was, I think, something along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing here, but develop homegrown talent as one of the key pillars. The question, what the question points to, is that actually there's been quite a lot of upheaval at academy level, in the sense that James Vaughan, who was head of loan pathways and head of academy recruitment, and the academy director, Gareth Prosser, both left towards the end of Kevin Thelwell's tenure over the summer, and have not been replaced. Effectively, they've got interims doing that role. So there's a lad called Ben Dixon, who's interim head of academy recruitment, and then Carl Darlington, the head of coaching, is currently interim academy director. They will look to appoint, I believe, people for those roles. And this is where Cox's input is going to be really valuable, in the sense that he comes, this is a promotion for him. He was the academy director at Manchester United until the start of this season. Did similar role at Watford and a few other clubs. And you'd expect him, I know for a fact that he's been pretty hands-on so far. So I think that the first thing we'll see is that he'll want to make some appointments there. He'll want to get those appointments right. And I think more than people above or to his side, I think he's going to be the one tasked with doing that. So nothing to report yet in terms of outcomes, but I think processes are underway. And I think the next thing is, hopefully in due course, we'll hear about those appointments and be able to discuss them a little bit more.
Good stuff. We will rattle through a couple more before we wrap up. On Blue Sky, D6 Bass said, what's happening with Nelson Dock? Are we going to buy that too?
No major update. Something the club has considered, certainly in conjunction with the Freaking Group. At various points, the Freaking Group has effectively gone to market. They sent Colin Chong, who's now in a regeneration role. They sent him to MIPIM, which is one of the big real estate conferences, and he effectively showcased the stadium project, and it was interpreted by most people in the room as a call for a very thinly veiled call for investment in the area. So I think ideally that the Freakins would have liked somebody to kind of come on board as a partner, whether that's a local council, local authority, or a private entity. There are potential proposals there, but I don't think I'm not aware of anything having moved forward to say planning permission. Everton actually, I don't know if people realise this, but Everton actually leasing Nelson Dock, which is the adjacent dock closer to the city centre, to Bramley Moor. Everton are actually leasing that right now, and a lot of that is kind of staff parking and logistical stuff. But I think that there is going to be a desire for a long-term solution there, and I think what happens elsewhere in that Liverpool water structure is going to be pretty interesting, because the club will monitor those developments with TFG and try and work out effectively what they want to do and how they want to respond. A long way to go here. I don't think this is necessarily going to move very quickly at all.
And we've got a couple more. So this is a great question from Stephen Grace, who said, do you know what's happened to the Toffee Lady? I heard a rumour that it was to do with health and safety and being allowed to throw the toffees. Surely there's a safe way to hand them out. It's a nice surprise to be given one at Sandhill Station, but not the same. Paddy, where is the Toffee Lady gone?
Yeah, I bet that's completely caught me off guard, but right, correct. Yeah, we've not seen the Toffee Lady so far this season, which is odd. Now you think about it, such a staple part of our kind of typical Goodison match days.
There you go.
I think that's kind of leave this one with me, and we'll do a little bit of digging on it.
Paddy Boylan investigates. Yeah. And then the last one is from Tangled Up in Blues. Who do you think is the player in the squad our fan base underappreciates the most? Who gets dismissed or unfairly harsh criticism? So who do you think is the player in the squad our fan base underappreciates the most, Paddy?
Michael Keane.
Oh, I think both of these questions are really difficult.
I think it's a really difficult question, because I actually think most people are probably rated about where they should be. I mean, is there anybody else you can think of?
Not really. I think Moyes' answer to this would be Dewsbury Hall.
Moyes' answer probably would be Dewsbury Hall. He loves Dewsbury Hall. Whenever we speak about him with Moyes, he kind of lights up a little bit. There's always this idea that he makes Everton play better, and he did say in the last press conference that we did after the Fulham game that I don't think fans have realised necessarily just how good he's been, and this kind of stuff. He's maybe a bit underappreciated. So Moyes would say Dewsbury Hall or Keane. Dyche would have said Keane. I'm gonna say Keane.
I'm gonna say Alcaraz, I think. Just because
I think Everton fans rate Alcaraz, though. I think Everton fans rate Alcaraz higher than Moyes does. If the question is about Moyes and who he doesn't appreciate enough, then I probably would go with Alcaraz, by the way.
Yeah, tricky one, that. I don't look at anyone and think they're underappreciated, really. I think a lot of people would say James Garner, but as your regular listeners know, I'm sort of on the fence about him a little bit still. But
I think he's been lauded quite a bit so far this season as well.
Yeah,
and as well by Moyes. So I'm struggling a little bit with this one. I think it's probably Michael Keane, and I actually think people inside Everton, based on some of their decision making over the past 12 months or so, would also have said Keane.
And then the second part, who gets dismissed or unfairly harsh criticism? I reckon I might get a mistake for this. I think Tarkowski gets a bit too much sometimes. I don't think he's had a good season by any means, and if he's made some mistakes, but it feels like when he makes mistakes at the moment, like people are very keen to jump on them.
Idrissa Gueye gets a little bit more criticism than I would have expected.
I've seen loads for him, really.
I've seen the kind of the perennial one with him that I've seen is that he doesn't use the ball well enough. And sure, he's not Andrea Pirlo or kind of a lovely silky passing midfielder like Luka Modric, Toni Kroos, that kind of player. But I actually think he's still pretty good, and it's kind of gone under the radar for me just how good he was in that second half against Fulham. By the way,
yeah,
I thought he was absolutely everywhere after a collective down day. I think for the midfield at Sunderland, and I still think Idrissa Gueye gets a little bit more than he maybe deserves.
There you go. That's definitely one for the comments. So just reply in the comments with underrated : and then your player, overrated : and your player. Even if you never usually comments, it'll take you 5 minutes, 5 seconds to do it.
And if we get hate mail from Oklahoma City, Matt, around the point where I start to mention Michael Keane, then we know a certain member of the Vera family has been listening intently. And
that is a great question from Tangled Up in Blues. So thank you for that one. It doesn't feel like we've got any massively overrated or massively underrated players in the squad. But if they're overrated or underrated, we wouldn't know, would we? So I suppose it makes sense. It's a difficult question to answer. But if you've got thoughts on that, do leave them in the comments. That's it from us this week. We always go on for ages on these international break podcasts, don't we? Thank you for your patience if you made it all the way through to the end here. We've got loads coming up this week on the Blue as we build up to that game against Manchester United. If you are watching us on YouTube, do hit like, do hit subscribe, leave your comments on overrated, underrated players and anything else we discussed today. If you are listening to us on iTunes or on Spotify, you can leave us a rating and leave us a review. And a reminder, we are sponsored by the Bridewell. Check out Paddy's interview with Tiano Barry. That will be in the description of the podcast and the video. Got loads of other good stuff in there as well. Got discounts on all Laura's stuff. Really good stuff in the build to Christmas if you want to buy some of that. Link to listen to ad-free over on Blue Room Extra 2. And plenty going on over there. So cheers for tuning in. That's been your Everton Byline. Up the Toffees. We'll speak to you again soon.